In the summer of 1896, the world witnessed a conflict unlike any other. It wasn't a grand campaign stretching over years, nor a bloody stalemate fought in trenches. It wasn't marked by massive armies marching across continents or by shifting front lines carved in blood and steel. No, this war would make history for an entirely different reason. It was a war that began and ended before most people had even finished their breakfast. A war so brief, so astonishingly short, that it almost sounds like a myth. Just 38 minutes after the first shots rang out, it was all over. But to dismiss it as a historical oddity would be a mistake. Behind those 38 minutes lies a much larger story. A story of empire and ambition, of wealth and politics, of betrayal, rivalry, and the unstoppable march of colonialism. This is not just the story of a war, it is the story of Zanzibar at the crossroads of history. And it begins with an island, a jewel of the Indian Ocean, whose fate was decided in less time than it takes to watch an episode of television. This is the story of the Anglo-Zanzibar War, the shortest war in all of recorded history. At first glance, it might sound like nothing more than a curious footnote. A war that ended in less than an hour? How much damage could it really have caused? How much importance could it hold? But history is rarely that simple. Behind that short burst of gunfire lies a tale of ambition and empire, of immense wealth and strategic power, of betrayal, rivalry, and the clashing ambitions of rulers. It is the story of a tiny sultanate, Zanzibar, a small island off the coast of East Africa, standing in the shadow of the most powerful navy the world had ever seen, the Royal Navy of the British Empire. The clash would last for just 38 minutes, but its causes stretched back decades, rooted in global trade, colonial expansion, and the relentless competition for dominance during the scramble for Africa. This war was more than a curiosity. It was a moment that revealed the overwhelming reach of imperial power, the vulnerability of local rulers, and the speed with which centuries-old kingdoms could be brought to heel. It is a reminder that sometimes the smallest wars can reveal the largest truths about the world. Within hours of Khalid's bold seizure of power, the might of the British Empire arrived off the shores of Zanzibar. Warships bearing the Union Jack, the HMS St. George, Philomel, Raccoon, and Thrush anchored in the harbor, their guns trained on the Palace District. The sea, usually a symbol of trade and connection, now became a line of imminent threat. From the decks of these vessels, British officers observed the fortified palace, calculating the strength of Khalid's forces and the risks of confrontation. It was a moment where diplomacy met intimidation, and the outcome would depend on resolve as much as on firepower. The British consul Basil Cave stepped into the role of envoy and enforcer. With calm authority, he delivered an ultimatum to the self-declared sultan: step down by 9 a.m. on August 27th, or face the full force of the Royal Navy. Every word carried the weight of empire, a reminder that defiance would not be tolerated. But Khalid bin Bargash was resolute. He refused to bow to the ultimatum. Instead, he retreated deeper into the palace, barricaded gates, raising the Sultan's flag high and preparing his makeshift army for what he knew might be a fight for survival. Soldiers, palace guards, and loyal civilians took up positions behind walls and barricades, their determination palpable in the humid morning air. The stage was set. The island's tranquil streets, once filled with the hum of commerce and the scent of spices, now echoed with tension and the quiet anticipation of battle. The clock ticked inexorably towards 9 a.m., the hour when the British deadline would expire, and the clash between a tiny sultanate and the world's most powerful navy would finally erupt. It was a confrontation that no one could ignore, and one that would etch Zanzibar into the annals of history, not for months or years of fighting, but for a war that would be over before the morning tea was finished. The morning of August 27, 1896, dawned with a tense stillness over Zanzibar. By 8 a.m., crowds of curious citizens had gathered along the streets, watching the palace and harbor with a mix of fear and fascination. They could feel the weight of history pressing down, though few could imagine how brief it would be. Inside the palace, Khalid's men worked frantically to prepare their defenses. Cannons and machine guns were brought into position, barricades were strengthened, and soldiers readied themselves for a fight that seemed almost inevitable. Outside, the air was heavy from smoke from cooking fires and the distant cries of the city's inhabitants, unaware that war was about to erupt. At sea, the Royal Navy's 5 warships lay poised like predators. The HMS St. George, Philomel, Raccoon, Thrush, and Sparrow, massive engines and towering guns ready, trained their deadly firepower on the shore. Sailors lined the decks, hands trembling slightly over triggers, hearts pounding, knowing the moment to strike was almost upon them. At 9:55 a.m., the final ultimatum was delivered. Khalid had one last chance: lower the Sultan's flag and surrender. But the flag continued to flutter defiantly in the morning breeze. The clock ticked down. By 9 a.m., the deadline had passed. The flag still flew, and just like that, the shortest war in recorded history began. The Royal Navy opened fire. Cannonballs tore through the palace walls, sending splinters and bricks flying. Smoke and flames consumed the once grand structure. Khalid's artillery returned fire, but it was almost immediately silenced by the overwhelming naval bombardment. In the harbor, the Sultan's yacht, a symbol of his status and power, attempted to fight back, but it was no match for the British firepower. Within minutes, it was sunk, sending plumes of water and debris into the air. By 9:15 a.m., the palace was collapsing. Smoke billowed into the sky over Zanzibar city, visible for miles around. Casualties were mounting among Khalid's poorly trained defenders, soldiers, palace guards, and civilians who had hoped to protect their sultan against impossible odds. At 9:40 a.m., just 38 minutes after the first shots were fired, the fighting ceased. The sultan's flag was lowered. Khalid had escaped through a back door, seeking refuge at the German consulate, leaving behind a city scarred but still standing. In less than an hour, the war was over. The Anglo-Zanzibar War had made history, not for its devastation, but for its brevity. It was a stark reminder of the overwhelming power of empire, the fragility of sovereignty, and how quickly the ambitions of a single man could be crushed by the weight of global forces. The battle was short, but the consequences lasted decades. Over 500 defenders were killed or wounded in the bombardment. On the British side, just one sailor injured. The British quickly installed a new sultan, Hamud bin Mohammed, one who would obey British demands. Under his rule, Zanzibar officially abolished slavery in 1897, though under pressure from Britain. Khalid, the man who had defied the empire, lived in exile under German protection until he was eventually captured in 1916. Today, the Anglo-Zanzibar War is often remembered as a historical oddity, the shortest war ever recorded. But to view it merely as a curiosity is to miss the deeper story. It was a stark symbol of the overwhelming power of European empires during the scramble for Africa, a period when vast continents and centuries-old societies were reshaped by distant powers with little regard for local lives or traditions. Small nations like Zanzibar were caught between survival and defiance, forced to bend under imperial pressure or face swift consequences. In less than an hour, lives were lost, a city skyline altered, and history recorded a war unlike any other. And though brief, the lessons of Zanzibar in 1896 remain enduring, that in the struggle between might and principle, even the smallest players can leave a mark that resonates far beyond their moment.